Do you ever experience a gap between what you know and what you do? Anybody with me in that? Am I alone in that? That experience of that frustrating experience where you understand something, you believe something, you know something, and you do something else. We've all had that kind of frustrating experience. That we've all had the experience of, say, hearing this incredibly illuminating lecture on a Wednesday night at Biola on the lawn and being so brilliantly illuminated, and then waking up the next day with all this great resolve. Yes, I'm going to change my life. I'm going to be a different person. I know I learned something last night. I know what to do now. Everything's going to be different till about Friday. You're hungry for knowledge, you're drinking up all these ideas, and yet somehow something keeps failing. And you start to realize that you can't think your way to holiness. Oh, that we could. Because in some ways, knowing is relatively easy. But you can't think your way to holiness. Why? Why not? Why is that? Is it because you forgot something? Is it because you don't know enough yet? Is there some other piece of knowledge that you need? Is it because you're not thinking hard enough that you can't think your way to holiness? No. That's not it. The problem is that we falsely assume that we are just thinking things, as if knowledge and information and the acquisition of sort of doctrinal belief would be enough to transform us. But we are more than that. We are other than that. And so the problem here with that notion, one of the reasons I think we get frustrated with not being able to think our way to holiness is because we overestimate the power of thinking in some ways. We actually fail to appreciate that we are more than thinkers. We are not just, as Descartes put it, thinking things. So the problem isn't just your individual knowledge or your lack of resolve. In fact, your best thinking often gets you to very frustrating places. So to call, now I'm a philosopher. I make my living inviting people to think about things. In fact, that's what I'm doing for you tonight. I want you to put your thinking caps on with me and rethink discipleship. But at the same time, I want us to recognize the limits of thinking and come to appreciate what I want to call now the power of habit. The power of habit. I think that many of us as evangelicals have underestimated the power of habit and therefore have a sort of stunted understanding of what discipleship looks like. If we are going to appreciate the spiritual significance of the power of habit, I think we need to embrace a much more sort of holistic, biblical, embodied picture of who we are. We in strange ways, we kind of implicitly imagine that we're just brains on a stick. Do you know what I mean? Like we kind of think we're just these thinking things, and if I can just deposit all the right information into that intellectual receptacle, well then that should translate into the kind of way of life that Jesus is calling me to. But we all know that gap between what we know and what we do. The gap is the power of habit. And so I want to invite us this evening to think about and come to a deeper appreciation of this power of habit in the scriptures. I think one of the reasons why, because we tend to think of human beings as these thinking things, we almost misread the Bible. We sort of read that thinking thingism back into the scriptures. Let me give you one example. In Philippians chapter 1, there's a beautiful prayer that Paul prays for the Christians in Philippi. And it simply goes like this. And in many ways, it's almost like a manifesto for what a Biola education should be. Paul says this: "This is my prayer, that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight, so that you may be able to discern what is best, and may be pure and blameless for the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ, to the glory and praise of God." Now, what's interesting to me is if you listen to that prayer, and if you have the habits of mind that we tend to have, you might imagine that Paul is actually praying that we would know, right? That we would increase in our knowledge, increase in our wisdom so we know what to do. But actually, that's a sign that we're reading too fast. Because listen again to what Paul's prayer is. This is my prayer, that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight. Do you get that? We almost don't even know what to do with that. Paul isn't praying that you would know what to love. His prayer isn't for knowledge so that you would know what to love. His prayer is almost the exact opposite. I pray that you would love in order to know. What does that even mean? What does that even mean that love precedes knowledge? I love in order to know. Well, I think this gives us an insight, a signal into how the scriptures understand the very nature of who we are as creatures made in the image of God. Paul, you could say, appreciates that in a way the center of gravity of the human person isn't so top heavy. It's not centered up in the mind and the intellect. The center of gravity of the human person is centered in the heart, in our cardia, in this sort of visceral center of who we are, the seat of our longings and desires and loves. That's why Paul, when he's praying for us to be transformed, he actually begins by praying for our loves. So what difference would that make for how we think about the Christian life, how we think about discipleship? What if the center and seat of the human person is found not in the kind of heady regions of the intellect, though that's important, but is actually in the kind of gut level regions of the heart, the seat of our wants? Remember, the question Jesus is posing to us is, what do you want?